Between the 12th and 15th centuries, a strict and brutal educational system was established across Europe, affecting millions of children over 3 centuries. This was not a random event, but the result of a combination of church power, the need for an educated workforce, and the concept of education through corporal punishment. Today, we will analyze this system from a historical and sociological perspective to understand how medieval educational institutions operated and to draw important lessons for protecting children's rights in the modern world. If you are interested in learning from history to build a safer future for children, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment, letting me know where you are watching from. Historical knowledge helps us identify and prevent similar patterns in the present. To understand why this strict educational system could persist, we need to consider the context of the Middle Ages. According to the research of Dr. Jacques Le Goff from the Sorbonne University, this period was characterized by, first, the centralized power of the Catholic Church. The Church held almost absolute control over education, with over 80% of schools owned by monasteries and local churches. The Church considered physical discipline an essential part of spiritual education, based on the biblical concept of spare the rod, spoil the child. Second, a rigid feudal social structure. Society was divided into distinct classes, where education was seen as a tool to maintain social order. Only about 3 to 5% of the population was literate, primarily the clergy and nobility. Access to education was strictly limited by social class. Third, an agricultural economy and resource scarcity. With over 90% of the population living off agriculture, investing in education was considered a luxury. Families often sent their children to religious institutions not for academic purposes, but to alleviate their economic burden. These conditions created an environment where a harsh educational system could thrive without significant opposition. It is important to note that a strict educational system was not unique to Europe. During the same period, we see similar models in the Byzantine Empire. Schools run by the Orthodox Church employed similarly strict discipline, as recorded by Anakomnenos in the Alexiad. The Islamic states of Iberia. Although their approach to content differed, madrasas also used corporal punishment as part of the educational process, as noted in the works of Ibn Khaldun. The Mongol Empire. In conquered territories, the educational system combined local traditions with strict disciplinary methods, as described in Juvayni's History of the World Conqueror. This indicates that the use of corporal punishment in education was a product of the era's conception of the relationship between power and knowledge, not an anomaly of a specific culture. This system was legitimized through canon law and royal decrees. According to the Corpus Juris Canonici, the official code of canon law, the use of disciplina corporalis was clearly stipulated as a legal means of education. Emperor Charlemagne's decree of 789, the Admonitio Generalis, also set educational standards that included the use of punishment to maintain discipline. The role of religion in justifying this system is noted in the works of Thomas Aquinas, particularly in his Summa Theologica, which shows that punishment was considered necessary for a child's moral development. However, some theologians like Peter Abelard expressed skepticism about the effectiveness of this method. According to research by Philippe Ariès, published in the classic work Centuries of Childhood, the medieval educational system operated on the following model. The selection mechanism was based on social class criteria and the ability to make economic contributions to the church. Documents show that selection depended on a family's ability to pay and their relationship with the local clergy, with about 2,000 to 3,000 children admitted to cathedral and monastery schools each year across Europe. This process was organized by bishops and abbots, following a strict procedure laid out in the Rule of Saint Benedict. The operational process of these institutions was thoroughly studied by Professor Peter Abelard in his letters to Heloise. Students, typically aged 7 to 14, underwent a 7 to 10-year educational program, including the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, logic, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, Music. Learning took place from early morning until late at night, involving monks, professors, and older students who served as mentors. The supervision system was established with a strict hierarchical structure. Archives at the Vatican Library show that each school had a magister scholarum, headmaster, magistri, teachers, and custodes, supervisors. They had the authority to impose punishments ranging from mild to severe, including fasting, isolation, and corporal punishment with tools like whips, bamboo canes, and the ferula, a thin iron rod. In terms of numbers, researchers estimate that the total number of children who went through the formal education system during this period reached 500,000 to 750,000 over the 3 centuries from the 12th to the 15th. The annual rate was about 15,000 to 20,000 students enrolled in religious educational institutions across Europe. The geographical distribution was mainly concentrated in France, Germany, and Italy, which accounted for about 60% of all educational establishments. The primary age of students was from 7 to 16, with the 10 to 14 age group being the largest at 45%. Dr. Jacques Verger from the University of Paris 4th remarks that these numbers reflect not only the scale of the educational system, but also the degree of social control the Church exercised through education. Concentrating large numbers of children in religious institutions created an environment where strict disciplinary methods could be easily applied. These figures show the significant scale and systematic application of harsh educational methods during the medieval period. A key question is, why did this system persist for so long without facing strong societal opposition? Information control played a crucial role in maintaining the system. Research shows the Church held a monopoly on the production and distribution of books, with over 95% of materials written in Latin, a language only the clergy and nobility could understand. A specific example is how chronicles and annals only recorded the positive aspects of religious education, while completely ignoring complaints or opposition from families. Institutional protection was carried out through a tight network of law and religion. Legal documents from the period indicate that opposing the Church's educational methods could be considered an act of heresy, leading to severe penalties such as excommunication. This was enforced through the system of ecclesiastical courts, which held supreme authority in matters of education and morality. A network of interests also played a significant role. According to an analysis by expert Richard Southern in Western Society and the Church in the Middle Ages, the system created clear benefits for the nobility and clergy, who needed an educated workforce for administration and the Church. This led the powerful classes to remain silent about problems within the educational system, as long as it continued to supply qualified individuals to serve their interests. The impact of this strict educational system is documented through various modern research perspectives. From a psychological perspective, historical psychological studies by Dr. Lloyd DeMause in The History of Childhood show that regular exposure to corporal punishment caused deep psychological trauma, evidenced by autobiographical accounts from students of that era. These effects included anxiety, persistent fear, and difficulty forming trusting relationships with adults. The social impact spread to families and communities. Families were often torn apart when children were sent to distant educational institutions for long periods, creating emotional and cultural gaps. Many rural families lost young laborers, leading to economic hardship and changes in the traditional social structure. Culturally, the anthropological research of expert Caroline Bynum in Jesus as Mother indicates that this educational system contributed to creating a generation of clergy and intellectuals with a rigid view of discipline and order. This influenced social governance and conceptions of children's rights for centuries to come. Not everyone passively accepted this system. Historical documents record many forms of resistance and protest. From the 13th century, educational reform movements initiated by some theologians and professors began to appear. Scholars like Peter Abelard and Roger Bacon openly criticized overly harsh educational methods, advocating for the use of reason and discussion instead of corporal punishment. This movement was relatively small, but had a significant influence in intellectual circles. Notably, some parent groups and local communities organized forms of protest, from withdrawing their children from schools to establishing small private schools with more humane teaching methods. This is recorded in documents from cities like Bologna and Paris, where merchant guilds funded independent schools. The results of these resistance efforts, while not completely changing the system, contributed to gradual reforms. Some universities like Oxford and Cambridge began to adopt regulations limiting the use of corporal punishment, showing the positive influence of the protest movements. The strict educational system finally began to weaken in the 15th century and gradually ended in the 16th century due to a combination of factors. The Renaissance brought a new conception of education, emphasizing the holistic development of the individual rather than just focusing on discipline. Humanists like Erasmus and Montaigne advocated for educational methods based on encouragement and the development of critical thinking. The Protestant Reformation created competition in the field of education, forcing the Catholic Church to improve its methods to retain followers. Martin Luther and other reformers established schools with more humane teaching methods, putting pressure on the traditional educational system. The growth of a commercial and urban economy created a demand for people with more practical skills, not just scholastic knowledge. This led to the establishment of vocational and trade schools, with more flexible educational methods. According to an assessment by expert Philippe Ariès, the end of the strict medieval educational system was not the result of a sudden revolution, but a natural evolution of society towards more humanistic values. However, its legacies continued to influence educational concepts for centuries. When studying the strict medieval educational system, we recognize that similar models have appeared throughout human history. 18th to 19th centuries. Boarding schools in England with the fagging system and corporal punishment, described in detail in the works of Charles Dickens, and documents from Eton College and Harrow School. 19th to 20th centuries. Seminaries and monasteries in North America, Ireland, and Australia applied similar disciplinary methods, especially in institutions for Indigenous children, with consequences documented in official reports like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. 20th century. Some educational systems in totalitarian regimes used similar disciplinary methods, but for different political ends, showing that the power control education model can be replicated in various contexts. This demonstrates that the abuse of power in education is a systemic and recurring problem in history, according to the assessment of Professor David Rothman in his work, The Discovery of the Asylum, Social Order and Disorder in the New Republic. Today, according to a 2023 UNICEF report, the situation regarding child protection in education has seen significant progress, but still faces many challenges. Approximately 246 million children worldwide are still without access to safe, quality education, with a significant proportion facing inappropriate forms of discipline in the learning environment. UNESCO identifies modern forms of abuse in education, including corporal punishment, psychological violence, discrimination, and neglect. These issues are particularly prevalent in economically disadvantaged regions of Africa, South Asia, and parts of Latin America. Although the current socio-economic context is completely different from the Middle Ages, experts from the organization Save the Children note alarming similarities. The use of asymmetrical power in educational relationships, a lack of transparency in closed educational institutions, and the justification of harsh disciplinary methods based on cultural or religious traditions. Drawing from the historical lessons of the medieval educational system, international organizations have developed better protection and prevention mechanisms. An international legal framework was established through the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, 1989, in which Articles 19 and 28 clearly stipulate the right to be protected from all forms of violence and the right to education in a safe environment. Currently, 196 countries have signed and committed to implementing this convention. Monitoring mechanisms are carried out by bodies like the Committee on the Rights of the Child, which periodically assesses member states on the situation of child protection in education. Each year, the committee reviews about 30 to 40 national reports and provides specific recommendations. In terms of education and awareness, teacher training programs on positive discipline and non-violent classroom management skills have been implemented in over 80 countries, with support from UNESCO and international non-governmental organizations. In academia, the medieval educational system is evaluated from various perspectives, creating lively and fruitful debates. The institutionalist school, represented by scholars like Jacques Le Goff and Philippe Ariès, argues that the strict educational system was an inevitable product of the social and religious structure of the time, based on evidence from legal and administrative sources. They emphasize that any evaluation of this system must be placed in its specific historical context. The social history school, with scholars like Emmanuel Leroy-Ladurie and Carlo Ginzburg, counters this view by focusing on the experiences of individuals and communities. They use sources like diaries, letters, and court testimonies to demonstrate that even in the Middle Ages, there were voices of opposition and efforts to find more humane educational methods. This debate is important because it helps us better understand the complexity of the historical process and has direct implications for how we understand and address current educational issues. It reminds us that what is considered normal in one era may be completely inappropriate in another context. The study of the medieval educational system provides important lessons for modern society. On power, we learn that concentrating educational authority in the hands of a few organizations without independent oversight creates a fertile ground for abuse. The need for decentralization, transparency, and multiple voices in educational decision-making is a crucial lesson we must apply even today. On information, the lesson of information control highlights the importance of ensuring parents and the community's right to access information about the educational methods being used. Transparency in education is not just a right, but also a tool to protect children from inappropriate methods. On community, the role of the community in monitoring and protecting children in the educational environment is paramount. History shows that when the community actively participates in education, forms of abuse decrease significantly. The connection between family, school, and community creates an effective protective network for children. As Dr. Barbara Hannawalt from the University of Minnesota observes in her study, Growing Up in Medieval London, the most positive changes in medieval education often came from places with strong local community involvement, where parents and community leaders had a say in deciding educational methods. Through the study of the medieval educational system, we have seen many important lessons. First, unchecked centralized power in education can lead to severe consequences for children, no matter how good the initial motive. Creating independent monitoring mechanisms and ensuring the participation of multiple stakeholders is essential. Second, the importance of listening to children's voices and valuing their rights in the educational process. History shows that when children are treated as passive objects to be molded, rather than as individuals with the right to be respected and to develop, the risk of abuse increases. Third, the necessity of continuously evaluating and improving educational methods based on scientific research and community feedback. What is considered traditional is not always synonymous with effective and safe. These insights help us build a safer and more effective educational system for future generations, while also identifying early warning signs that could lead to the abuse of power in education. Historical knowledge is not just for understanding the past, but for building a better future for children. If this video has helped you understand more about the importance of protecting children in the educational environment, please share it with those who care about protecting children's rights. Subscribe to the channel to follow more meaningful and educational historical analyses. Let me know in the comments, what do you think is the most important lesson from today's history lesson? Is there anything in our current educational system that we need to pay attention to and improve? Thank you for taking the time to learn about this difficult but necessary topic. Understanding history helps us become better protectors of children in the present day. We will see you in the next video.